Okay, we're going to come back to the big group, everyone. I'm so happy to see everybody engaged in their big group conversations, and I want to make a little mini announcement before we get to the end of our day. Normally when I'm presenting in a conference, I linger around as long as people have questions and things, but as I explained at the beginning of our time today, I didn't have a voice yesterday and have this viral load, and so I'm going to do what I never do, and I'm going to leave right at 4, and that's not because I don't want to be open and responsive to questions and feedback. Please feel free to email me, but I kind of feel like I just need to go lay down. And I'm really glad my voice and my fever kind of hung in there and stuff, but you know when you're almost to the end of the finish line and your body goes lay down or fall down, I'm kind of there. But this has been so engaging and invigorating for me, I forgot I was ill. So thank you. I got a little vacation from that. So Elizabeth has the microphone, and don't feel like we have to go in order of the questions. Whatever your group came up with that felt the most impactful, we've got a whole half hour here and we can circulate around several times. But who has something they'd like to share with a larger group that emerged out of your small group? Elizabeth, over here.
One of the things that I was thinking is this is a way we should teach all students, whether they've been developmentally traumatized or not. Just that safe learning environment is better.
Exactly, because who won't benefit from that?
So in listening to the students today, listening about their challenges with connection, and hearing that loud and clear, I also heard that connecting was the tonic for some of, their reactiveness. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that, because it's the thing that they're holding out here, yet it's the thing that's hooking them in over here. And your thoughts on how we approach that?
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in trying to read the classroom 100% of the time and watching for people's activations and things, and knowing that it's always going to be an ebb and flow of expansion and contraction around the connection piece, and giving multiple modalities for students to connect. So not only can they attempt to connect to me and other students, but a range of materials that they can connect with. Videos, vignettes, having them bring in something that they felt a connection with and offer it to the group, and letting people come and go, naming that ambivalence out loud. And in the WIT 1 basic class, there's so much ambivalence because we're looking at emotional issues in the face of transition and how they impact people. And there's a lot of activation for students who don't even have developmental trauma because they're looking at issues they previously haven't. So I name up front, there's going to be days you want to throw my book across the room. I understand that. Don't hurt yourself. I'm fine with that. You're going to want to engage with some material, disengage from it. And I said, we need as a culture to figure out how to do healthy connection and healthy disconnection. And I share with them that the goal is not to be in connection 100% of the time. That's exhausting. I don't want to do that. But to mindfully disconnect in ways that aren't harmful. And so I give them a list of ways to disconnect. To set the timer on their phone, study for 45 minutes, and disconnect into something that gets them out of their limbic system into their frontal cortex. So the things we talked about earlier, creativity, movement, music, dance, humor, and to figure out in their time management schedule breaks of disconnection so that they actually get an experience of disconnecting but not disassociating. And they purposely disconnect and then come back to whatever it is. And I tell them, you can come and go, leave in the classroom. If you have to stand outside the door of our WIT classroom and listen from the hall, I have students do that. And once they know they can do that, they don't need to do it anymore. So ways to be adjacent but not necessarily connected. What else did you discover in your groups? Yes?
So I know one of our conversations was sort of wrestling with the concept of judging and being educators who have to evaluate and assess students, and how can we help differentiate judging the student as a worthy, noble human being versus assessing the quality of their work, and what are some means of communicating that to students affected?
Yeah, I always start off the term by saying that I want to convey in as many ways as I can what's good and right and worthy about each of them as human beings, their personhood, their essence. And that is separate from me giving growth-based feedback about how they can improve their academic work, right? So my comments on their written work will be a mix of feedback where I say, I love this idea, and I have a thought that maybe if you add this piece in, you could develop it more fully. So I'm joining with and naming what they're already doing right. And then I'll put in a line or two about what growth I notice is occurring for them and how awed I am by that, how blown away. And so right after class is over, which is like a 4-hour class, I hide away for 45 minutes and jot down what I call positive attagirls for these women. And I embed them in my feedback in the next paper. It's a little bit of extra work, but the buy-in I get and the openness to feedback, because when somebody specifically remembers and sees and then comments about progress, just the feeling of progress creates success and safety. And that we bother to name it, because they know that's not the typical classroom experience. And so now it's gotten to be kind of automatic. Other insights, questions, comments?
So I shared an experience that for me was very informative and helpful in terms of creating student successes. I had my class do a class presentation at the end, and I had a student who, terrified of public speaking, couldn't do it, had failed 2 classes previously, other teachers, because they couldn't do the presentations. And so I said, so what would be a success for you? What could you do? And we talked about various things like do a presentation facing the other way. No, I couldn't do that. You know, we went through this whole list and there wasn't anything. And I said, can you do the project? And they said, yes, I can do the project. And I said, can you show up to class? And that was hard. Just the idea of then coming to class. Like, they weren't even sure they could do that. And I said, let's count that as your success. And I will pass you on this if you can just do the project and show up. And they did. And then they watched all the other students' presentations. And as the class was finished, they stood up with their project and explained it to everybody kind of on an individual basis. And so for me, that was a developmental piece to move from this place of I absolutely cannot do any of this. It's like, where can we find the success in babies, like you said, the baby steps.
In baby steps, and it's a challenging dilemma, isn't it? Because we have academic standards that we need to hold our students towards, and yet is there a way we can feel ethical about that and do exactly what you're talking about and say that step is even bigger perhaps for this student than the actual presentation, and grant some of our trauma-informed learners some grace, because the community college is this unique opportunity to do those half steps that will become full steps really quickly, and especially for our potential transfer students, they're not going to make it without us, because they're not going to be able to make that big leap, and we know what they're up against when they make that 4-year transfer, right? And so it's like an act of grace and goodness for me when we do those modulated pieces, knowing that that student has really put out as much effort as the other one, and finding a way to reconcile that inside of ourselves.
And her project was beautiful.
And you gave her space to sit back and gather her courage, which is what she needed. Absolutely.
I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah, Kristen.
So I'd like you to hear more. I'd like to hear more about your thinking on stop waiting for motivation.
Oh, yes. If you want the full chapter out of my third book, I can email it to you because it's like 3 pages. It's not very much. But it's the part of the example I explain in there is I work a 15-hour day most days because the lovely drunk driver that was hit and run that didn't stop left me $1.3 million in medical debt. And so I work a full-time faculty position and a nearly full-time private practice in order to pay $3,000 a month on the medical debt, which will be gone in 38 more months. Which is, yes, there will be a party, you're all invited, and then I will sleep for 2 days. So I never feel like working a 15-hour day. I don't think many people do, even though I love my work. And to get in exercise, I get to get up this time of year around 5 in the morning and go into the dark, rainy, cold Oregon weather and go for a run. And no part of me, I explain this to my students, no part of me goes, oh, the alarm's gonna go off at 5 a.m. I get to leave this warm bed and put on 10 pounds of rain gear and run with a miner's light on my head, slopping around my neighborhood, and then come home and get ready for my, and if that was the case, I'd never work out, right? No part of me at the end of the evening goes, it's gonna be so good to floss my teeth and clean the cat box, organize, like I just don't, I don't know how to get amped about that. But do you know what I'm talking about? But we expend a lot of energy trying to kind of feel like doing something. So I just teach my students, if you decide the things you need to do to live an authentic, flourishing life and you just do them, you now no longer have to spend all that time and energy trying to get in the right mood. Right? When people go, well, you know, I was working out or whatever, but then I stopped doing it and I just can't get back into the groove. What they're saying is, I can't find my motivational feeling. I'm saying stop looking for it and just like do it, right? Because everything I've accomplished since 1983 has been just on a decision. And we tend to make decisions from our frontal cortex, and motivation a lot of times is halfway between our limbic system and our reward system, and those are not reliable places to hang out. It's sort of like the notion love is a decision, it's not an emotion, and so love is a decision to act lovingly even when the other person's a putz that particular day, right? To take the higher road, because if we only acted on what we were feeling, it'd just be like, oh, I don't like you either, right? So we can behave ourselves to really lovely, successful lives. And so that's what I try to teach them, and the relief that comes over them that they don't have to feel a certain way to take action is just stupendous. You're all percolating on that as it relates to yourself. I can feel that. I've been in this room before. I might have just lost you there because everybody's just going, oh, how do I make a decision about that? Right? What else? I know people are feeling kind of tired and maybe a little traumatized by the material. Yeah.
I've been thinking a bit about the caregiver failures and the diversity piece, and I think we have societal failures too, and that's a big, I think we're going to see more and more of them. And I don't know how that exactly would relate to trauma-based learning, but I think those sense of lack of self-worth that's being repeated to you by the larger society because of your sexuality, your race, your gender can all, I don't know, I think that all overlaps.
It really does, because we're talking about environmental failures, whether it's environmental failures in the family, societal environmental failures, you know, and as we get more disconnected, those overlays from the family unit on out to the community, to the larger country, to the world, there can be multiple assaults on that failure level. Right? Alienation. I work in student services, and so the multicultural centers right across the hall from me, all the student government offices and clubs, and a lot of our disenfranchised students are right around the Women's Center. And after some results in November, I'll say neutrally, the nameless dread level dripped off the walls. And it wasn't just students. I had staff and faculty and other folks in my office saying, you do trauma stuff, right? I feel traumatized. And so collectively, we're disconnected, but we're connected around our trauma, even though it's different for each of us. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this showing up in class with people who didn't experience developmental trauma but are having some shock trauma right now. And it's just going to be more and more. And the more informed we are, and that we can inform our colleagues, the safer we can make experiences for students. Because I want community colleges to be the oasis where people go when they don't know where else to be safe. Not just for education, but they come out and utilize the community resources and say, oh, I actually could take some classes here. This place feels good.
Hi again. Just filled with questions. One thing I do want to just comment, an interesting book that I read recently is called Tribe by Sebastian Junger, which speaks to the alienation and how our community is not connected. And there's some really interesting research he's done. For example, why when during our colonial history, when the European settlers were captured by Indian communities, they did not want to return to the European community because they felt so connected, yes. And particularly women, which is interesting. And then, you know, you've probably heard about the phenomena of soldiers wanting to return to war. Yes. They come here, they feel alienated, they've lost their connection with individuals that they slept with, they slept in close quarters with, they ate with, they survived with for months at a time, and then they come back home and they feel completely alienated, and so they want to return to where they felt connectedness. So I would recommend the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger, where it's a slim book and it's very interesting to read. But speaking of soldiers, speaking of veterans, speaking of men, I just wanted to confirm that the identification, the disruptions, because we were largely hearing from women that the research indicates that the same behaviors, the same thoughts occur in men as well, or is there a different manifestation of trauma-informed learning in men that we might want to look out for?
That's a lovely question. In developmental trauma, you're going to see really similar things. You're going to see most males occupy more of the pride-based identifications. They will have the shame-based, but what you will witness is the pride-based because of the dilemmas of that gender, of not being able to show that. Shock trauma, that's a perfect question. Shock trauma is out of my expertise area because I've got good people in the community to refer my students to, and I see a lot more of the developmental trauma, but I'd love for us to reconvene at some point and get some folks up here presenting whose expertise is in shock trauma, and we can compare and contrast ways to move people through shock trauma, especially on gender and shock trauma of war, shock trauma versus other forms of shock trauma. It'd be fascinating to see how that presents, and that's outside of my expertise area just because of my population, but I'd love to learn that, wouldn't you all? That'd be great. That'd be great. I can feel everybody has afternoon brain, right? One question, yes. Kimberly wants to make sure it's on the tape.
Okay. I don't want to be on the tape, but your best answer to what do you say to the student in the bathroom?
What do I say to the student in the bathroom? I say, finish up in here because it smells bad. And I got a queasy stomach. I really do. But just what you just did, they laugh, and all of a sudden they're in their frontal cortex. And I can do some connection, right? And so I'll say something like, can you come with me? And if I'm on the verge of teaching a class, I know who the safe resource people who are up to speed are and can get them there and get them in. Or I'll say, I've got time, walk to the cafeteria, let's go get a cup of tea. And I'm the goddess of handouts. People in my life dread the folder when they see me coming because they know I have a handout for them. And I'll come into my office and I'll say, here's this chart of developmental trauma. I don't know if this is true for you, But let's look at a couple pieces that might be going on, and let's look at how normal that is, and there's something we can do about it. And you're going to feel ambivalent about wanting to allow me to help you and wanting to run, and we'll work with that too. But you can do this, and I had developmental trauma, and I made it through college, and I know the tricks. Because it goes back to what you were saying about tribe. If we self-identify, and assuming that's true for us, as tribe, and say, I will sit on the log next to you, metaphorically in the forest, and we can be confused together and not know the solution, but I will not leave you alone. You can come and go, you can make that, but you can find me here. And so one young woman, I made myself available to her for 20-minute increments every single day for 3 weeks, because she was so on the verge of going, and she had so much potential, and some of the times she would come and some of the times she wouldn't. And on that last 20-minute interval, she came in and she said, nobody has ever known how to stay when I'm afraid and go. And she said, I just needed to know you were there. Let's buckle down and do the work. So it takes a lot more energy on our parts when we're already overstretched and overtaxed. But those students then, like the students we heard from, then go tell other students, because the students talk to each other, the traumatized, and say, go talk to Kara, go talk to Christina, go talk to Stacy, go, and then we don't have to be in the bathroom so much. Because once a student can say, so-and-so made it better, and they had real things that made it better, that starts going through the airwaves. I just want to thank all of you for such an amazing day and all this participation and richness. I came away with so much more and learned a lot as well. And I have a feeling most of us may be in the same room again. I just have a feeling that Elizabeth's going to get questions and comments and what ifs, and then I'm going to get an Elizabeth email, and we're going to start percolating all over again. But I think that's exciting, and I feel so uplifted and re-energized, because it's lonely doing this work by ourselves. And to have shared language and come together in community, we're stronger and brighter and more resourceful for our students. So thank you so much for being here today. It was
And
lovely.
let's thank Kara for her time.
Thank you.